My name is Ian, your Walking with Legends podcast host, with a quick message before we begin. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who's listening to and sharing the podcast with others. That marketing and word of mouth is huge, as we don't pay anything for marketing, so please continue to share the page on Facebook, the podcast links to Podomatic, iTunes, and other platforms, and just continue to provide feedback. I appreciate all your support, and I hope that you're enjoying the content every week. As we mentioned last week, we're beginning the mini-series called Rivalries this week, where we examine some of the greatest rivalries in sports. Finally, I just want to remind everyone that we will now have a new website that houses content from both this show, as well as the other projects that myself and my brother Justin are involved in. So you can find that website by going to supertroutmanbros.myportfolio.com. So that's supertroutmanbros.myportfolio.com. Make sure to follow us on our social media platforms shown on that website and can just continue to help us spread the word, and we really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Every sports team has that one team that they absolutely love. While there may be other teams that they also support, there's always that one team that they feel passionate rooting for. On the other hand, there's always that one team that they just seem to just despise. Whether it's due to a particular player, coach, ownership, or whatever other circumstances, they just can't stand them whatsoever. For most fans, a football game is just that, a game, meant for entertainment or camaraderie, but for others, a football game means everything. From 1897, when they first played against one another, the colleges of Ohio State and Michigan have had a long-standing and toxic rivalry that has fueled each program, even to the point where losing to their rival means the whole season is seen as a failure. Not many people may know how this feud started, so today we're going to take a deeper dive into the annual showdown between these two college juggernauts, often referred to as the game, and why it's seen as one of the best rivalries not only in college football, but all of sports. Welcome to Walking with Legends, the podcast dedicated to telling the stories behind the most iconic athletes and teams in sports history and what made them become a legend. It's no secret that The Ohio State University and the University of Michigan have both had an incredible run of success throughout their programs' histories. With 19 national championships, 81 conference titles, 168 All-Americans, and almost 2,000 wins combined between them, they have experienced a great deal of success, and as a result, have an incredible amount of national exposure and recognition. The history of the rivalry between these two teams goes all the way back to 1897, the first time that the two teams suited up to play against one another. In this inaugural game held in Ann Arbor, Michigan, it resulted in a lopsided 34-0 victory for Michigan over a fledgling Ohio State squad. This started a trend of victories for Michigan for the first 15 years that saw them go 12-0-2 against Ohio State, thanks in large part to the arrival of legendary coach Fielding Yost to Michigan in 1901. Yost's Michigan squad became famously known as the, quote, point-a-minute team, as they outscored their opponents 550-0 in his first year on the job. Some games got so out of hand that their opponents actually quit, or asked to stop the game several minutes early, as was the case in the inaugural Rose Bowl game in 1901. Michigan was playing Stanford, and Stanford requested that the game be canceled after Michigan went up 49-0 in the start of the second half. The game was such a stunning result that the Tournament of Roses committee actually decided to run other events, like chariot races, instead of a football game for almost 15 years after that game, before eventually going back to football. Under Yost's leadership, Ohio State failed to be able to break through until 1919, when the team was led by star player Chick Harley. With Harley on the team, the Buckeyes experienced a great deal of success that helped them become more of a prominent name nationally, and the Buckeyes shocked the Michigan squad with a 13-3 game in 1919. Even Yost was impressed with Chick Harley and addressed the Buckeyes team after the game saying, quote, "You boys gave a grand exhibition of football strategy, and while I am sorry, dreadfully sorry, that we lost, I want to congratulate you, and you, Mr. Harley, I believe, are one of the finest little machines I have ever seen." End quote. In the early 1920s, the rivalry started to heat up as the games between the two squads began to become more competitive. A few hours before one of the games in Columbus, fans had gathered in a downtown hotel to sell tickets, and one Ohio State fan strolled across the lobby and shouted, quote, "We don't give a damn about the whole state of Michigan," end quote. The crowd, invigorated by these words, began to sing these lyrics to the tune of a song that a band in the lobby was playing, and the song would remain a Buckeye favorite to sing at games to this day. Despite the growing popularity of the rivalry in Columbus, Michigan would continue to dominate the rivalry until the arrival of Francis Schmidt as the coach of the Buckeyes in 1934. Under his leadership, the Buckeyes shed their reliance on the running game and opened up their offense to passing, to great results. Schmidt is most famous for his comments that he made to a reporter who, when asked whether he believed that Ohio State had a chance of beating Michigan, he replied, quote, "Of course we can win. Michigan puts their pants on one leg at a time just like we do," end quote. In the 4 years that followed this quote, the Buckeyes would win all 4 games against their rivals, outscoring Michigan 114-0, and spawning a humorous tradition that continues to this day. Feeling inspired by Schmidt's comments, the Ohio State Pants Club was formed by some businessmen who began a tradition of hosting a banquet to honor players and coaches after each victory over Michigan, where they awarded them with a miniature pair of metal golden pants, engraved with the date and score of the game on them. Another legendary player would emerge in the series in 1938, when Tom Harmon would help Michigan take control of the series for many years. Harmon was such a talent that garnered national attention that after his final game against the Buckeyes, which was a 40-0 demolishing affair, the entire Ohio State team lined up to shake his hand and congratulate him on such an incredible career. The loss tipped the scales out of Schmidt's favor as Ohio State moved to fire him for a lack of success in the series, humorously after he had just gone 4-0 in the series in the years before, and he was replaced by another legendary, although short-lived collegiate coach in Paul Brown. Most known for being the coach that led the Cleveland Browns and founded the Cincinnati Bengals football teams, he actually enjoyed a short stint with the Buckeyes in the early 40s, helping them to achieve their first national championship in the school's history in 1942. After the season, Brown left to join the U.S. Navy for World War II, and although it was expected that he would return after the war, he instead was hired by the Cleveland Browns, and the rest, as you could say, was history. Many sports historians debate about how the nature of the Ohio State and Michigan rivalry, and football in general, might have been different if Brown had instead chose to come back to the Buckeyes instead of going to the NFL. Brown was credited with being the first coach to utilize playbooks, a full-time coaching staff, and invented several football staples in today's games, such as using game film to scout opponents, the modern face mask, the draw play, and a system in which plays were called in from the sideline via a messenger. Brown's departure also tipped the scales of the rivalry back to Michigan's favor, as the team would go on to win 8 of the next 9 games between the two, but none were more famous than the infamous Snow Bowl game played in 1950. On November 23, 1950, a terrible blizzard came over Columbus, Ohio, dropping temperatures to only 5 degrees with up to 40-mile-an-hour winds, blanketing the ground with snow, halting game day traffic, and it would become the worst snowstorm in Ohio in almost 40 years. The Buckeyes had an undefeated record and Michigan was an uncharacteristic 4-4 record. Michigan, feeling as though the game would be to their benefit if they played, desired to go through with the game, even though they would essentially only be playing for pride. And those in control at Ohio State believed that the game should be canceled, as it would clinch the team the conference title by default. However, the AD for Ohio State agreed that the game should be played, mainly due to the fact that refunding 87,000 tickets would be more hassle than just going through with the game, in his opinion. The field conditions were so bad that the game was delayed for over 2 hours, and the players and officials struggled to even see the yard lines. The conditions took a heavy toll on both teams, as they combined to kick a conference record 45 punts and 10 fumbles. Both teams would often punt on first down, hoping that the other team would fumble the ball and be able to recover near the goal line instead of trying to score traditionally. The Wolverines ended up winning the game after the game's lone touchdown by a final score of 9-3, and, combined with an upset win by Northwestern over Illinois that day, received the bid to represent the Big Ten at the Rose Bowl, leaving the Buckeyes to stew in the shocking turn of developments. After the game, the Buckeyes fired their head coach, and a search for a new head coach was soon launched. A local newspaper reportedly put up a poll on who fans wanted to see as the new coach, which gathered humorous responses such as Lassie the dog, President Harry Truman, and Lana Turner, a famous actress at the time. The team settled for a coach that would help take both the Ohio State team as well as the rivalry to new heights when they hired Wayne Woodrow, or Woody, Hayes, a little-known coach from Miami of Ohio. Hayes had been known to require a great deal of respect and discipline from his players, which caused friction between himself and his players, especially during the first 3 years of his tenure as coach, where the team only amassed a pedestrian 16-9-2 record, including 2 losses to the Wolverines. The relationship between him and his players were so bad that he actually got locked out of the locker room by his players during his first year, and, being disgruntled by the lack of success, the local media and fans were shouting for his firing. Everything changed when Hayes recruited Howard Hopalong Cassidy and Jim Parker to the team as running back and offensive lineman respectively, and the team responded with an undefeated season, including a dramatic win over Michigan 21-7. The team would then capitalize on a Rose Bowl victory over USC to win Hayes' first national championship with the team, and the scales again tipped in Ohio State's favor for the following decade. It wasn't until the late 60s that the rivalry would gain new heights, as the Buckeyes crushed the Wolverines 50-14 in the 1968 game, the most lopsided victory for Ohio State over Michigan in the team's history, on their way to another national title. Michigan hired in a coach by the name of Bo Schembechler after the 1968 season, who developed a fierce rivalry with Woody Hayes as head coaches, but the two had already had an extensive history together before then as well. Before Hayes was the coach at Ohio State, he coached at Miami of Ohio, and Schembechler was a junior offensive tackle for the team when he was hired in. Like most of his teammates, he stated that he, quote, despised Hayes initially. However, the strong personalities of both individuals led to a mutual respect, and Hayes hired Schembechler on as a graduate assistant, where he took the position at Ohio State, and eventually as an assistant coach in 1958. Their passionate desire to win and stubbornness resulted in multiple clashes during coaches' meetings, in which they would yell at each other and kick furniture, and Hayes would repeatedly fire Schembechler in a fit of rage, only to rehire him immediately afterwards. Schembechler would remember his time with Woody, saying, quote, "It was tough coaching under Woody. Some of the players just couldn't take it. He was too demanding of some things. He would argue about ridiculous things, and there was no way you were ever going to win an argument with him." End quote. After 5 years on the staff at Ohio State, Schembechler began to be frustrated by his lack of moving up, and instead moved to Miami of Ohio, where he became the head coach and experienced success. A few years later, he was hired on at Michigan after a 15-minute interview, and instilled the passion, discipline, and kick in the pants, so to speak, that Hayes had brought to the Buckeyes to the Wolverines. The first game between the coaches in 1969 became known as one of the greatest games played between the two teams in the history of the rivalry. The Wolverines entered the game as a 15-point underdog despite being at home, and the Buckeyes team was considered by many in the media to be one of, if not the best team in the history of the game. The Buckeyes had won 22 consecutive games and had won each game by an average score of 41-8. Schembechler was said to be a man possessed heading into that game. He reportedly forced his wife to sleep in their baby's room the week of the game so that he could concentrate on creating a game plan, which revolved around stopping the Buckeyes' running game, which had become a staple of Woody Hayes' 3 yards in a cloud of dust mentality. The game plan worked to perfection as the Wolverines took a 21-12 lead in the second half and forced Ohio State quarterback Rex Kern to throw the ball, leading to little success, and the Wolverines hung on to shock the college football landscape with a 24-12 victory. The following year, Hayes changed his coaching philosophy from focusing on the next opponent to becoming obsessed with defeating Michigan. Hayes challenged his team with a 3-word motto, "Remember Ann Arbor," and the team gained their revenge the following year, winning a 20-9 victory over the undefeated Wolverines. Hayes would go on to remember that victory by saying, quote, "It was our biggest victory. It was the biggest because it makes up for what happened to us last year. The players were hurt. They promised me all along they were going to play their greatest game today, and they did. Going to the Rose Bowl wasn't the main thought on their minds. It was avenging last year's loss." End quote. The ensuing decade became known as the 10-Year War, where every year the conference championship was at stake for the winner, and both Hayes and Schembechler became obsessed, if not paranoid, at defeating their rival. Multiple humorous accounts of the extremes that both would go to gain a psychological advantage came as a result. One year, Hayes would make a habit to always whisper in the Michigan locker room, fearing that Schembechler had the locker room bugged. And once, while watching the film of a Michigan game, he noticed that the team was wearing shoes that he had never seen before. Fearing that they might give them a competitive advantage over his team, he found out exactly what type of shoe they were wearing and ordered the exact pair for his players to have as well. Archie Griffin, the star running back for the Buckeyes during the 1970s, recalled Hayes' preparations, saying, quote, "Woody would get ready for Michigan all year. We used to say that Michigan was a separate season in itself. Spring practices, we'd be already getting ready for the Michigan defense. It was a constant preparation for that game, the whole season, every Monday," end quote. Perhaps the most dramatic game of the 10-Year War occurred in 1973, when both teams came in with an undefeated record, playing for a spot in the Rose Bowl. In a hard-fought affair, the game ended in a 10-10 tie, which further complicated who would represent the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl. The Big Ten had a rule in place that had previously banned consecutive trips to the game, but had finally shed the rule in favor of having the conference champion represent them in the Rose Bowl instead. Due to the tie, the two teams were tied for the league title, so the league's athletic directors were forced to vote on who they thought should represent the conference instead. Schembechler was confident that Michigan would be chosen due to their more statistically dominating performance in the Ohio State-Michigan game. However, the athletic directors were driven more by the motive of who they believed had the best chance of winning the Rose Bowl to give them a better reputation, as Michigan had lost the previous year in the Rose Bowl to Stanford, and subsequently the Buckeyes were chosen to represent them instead. Upon learning the result of the voting, Schembechler left the media and walked around the studio he was filming a show in, swearing profusely and kicking furniture in a storm. The Wolverines would rebound in the coming years, defeating the Buckeyes 3 consecutive times in the late 70s, twice over an undefeated Buckeyes team, and the frustration that culminated over these setbacks ultimately led to one of the most infamous moments in college football's history. After losing to the Wolverines, the Buckeyes accepted a bid to play against Clemson in the Gator Bowl, despite Hayes having no interest in playing in the game. The Buckeyes were trailing 17-15 in the final minutes when Clemson linebacker Charlie Bauman intercepted Buckeyes quarterback Art Schlichter and was tackled on the Buckeye sideline. Hayes, furious with this progression, charged at Bauman and punched him underneath his chin. After the game, Hayes refused to apologize or resign from his position despite pressure, saying he preferred the university fire him instead, and was subsequently released as the head coach. The nation, shocked by the developments of this outcome, including Schembechler, who despite his intense rivalry was saddened by the events, as he went on to say, quote, "I'm saddened by it. I hate to see something like this happen. I was shocked. Well, not shocked, but disappointed. I hope you all look back over his career and all the good he's done and not dwell so heavily on his indiscretions. There's a pressure of coming to the end of a career. Things are slipping away from you and you're not winning enough. I just wish his career would have ended differently," end quote. The Buckeyes turned to Earl Bruce, the former head coach of Iowa State and former assistant coach for the Buckeyes in the 70s, to take the coaching reins, and he responded with a big year, rolling into the Michigan game undefeated and ranked second in the nation. A record crowd of 106,255 people showed up to Ann Arbor for the game, and the Buckeyes escaped with a narrow victory to earn a spot in the national championship. Despite the intense competition between Michigan and Ohio State, neither team had much success in their bowl games. Ohio State ended up winning only one of their 9 bowl games from 1971 to 1980, and Schembechler's teams lost all 6 of the games they played during that same stretch. The media speculated that the intensity and focus that both teams played with all season to reach that annual clash between the two rivals took so much out of the teams that they didn't have anything left when it came to playing for a bowl game, and ended up being letdowns compared to the thrill of playing against their rival. For the ensuing few decades, both teams traded blows, rattling off winning streaks and then regressing. Schembechler finally retired in 1989, handing the reins of the team to longtime assistant coach Gary Moeller, and putting an end to the Schembechler-Hayes era of the rivalry. For the next few decades, the game would lose some of its national luster as the teams rarely both excelled at the same time, making games between the two of less significance. However, in 1991, the Wolverines' star wide receiver Desmond Howard made headlines when he took a punt return back 93 yards for a touchdown, which broke the back of the Ohio State team. As he entered the end zone, he bent his leg and extended his arms to replicate the Heisman pose to the joy of the Michigan crowd, and would prove to become true as he became the first Michigan player since Tom Harmon in 1940 to win the Heisman Award. Earl Bruce had been fired a few years before due to his lack of success at winning the game, and ironically, his replacement, John Cooper, would be even worse in the rivalry. Although Cooper was a great recruiter of talent, his lack of respect for the Michigan rivalry and casual attitude towards its preparation infuriated Buckeyes fans, and resulted in a 2-10-1 overall record against the Wolverines during his tenure with the team. In one particular game in 1995, the Buckeyes came into the game undefeated and boasting several future NFL stars such as Eddie George, Terry Glenn, and Antoine Winfield, who defeated the competition heavily all year long. However, the Wolverines would respond with an outstanding game to upset the Buckeyes 31-23 and break the hearts of the Buckeyes once more. Eddie George, with tears in his eyes, was interviewed after the game and said, quote, "We've got to live with this, and it's going to be something I might not get over. My life goes on. I imagine this loss will always be a part of it," end quote. In 1997, the Wolverines would use a dramatic comeback victory over the Buckeyes to reach the national championship game, where they defeated Washington State to earn their first national championship since 1948 according to the AP poll, although they would have to share the championship with Nebraska, who was also named national champions by the USA Today and ESPN coaches poll. The Buckeyes, tired of losing to Michigan and frustrated by the lack of competitiveness nationally, fired Cooper and replaced him with a former Ohio State assistant coach in Jim Tressel. Tressel, desiring to put the Buckeye faithful at ease with his respect of the rivalry, addressed the home crowd during the Ohio State-Michigan basketball game, saying, quote, I can assure you that you will be proud of your young people in the classroom, in the community, and most especially in 310 days in Ann Arbor, Michigan on the football field. Tressel would go on to bring a period of dominance for Ohio State in the rivalry and in the national rankings, as his teams went 8-1 against the Wolverines from 2001 to 2010, and the Buckeyes went on to win a thrilling national championship game against the University of Miami for the title in 2002. The most memorable game between the two squads during this period, and debatably of the entire rivalry, occurred in 2006, when the Buckeyes came into the game ranked number 1 in the nation, and the Wolverines were number 2 in the nation, marking the first time since 1973 that the two teams came into the game as the top 2 teams in the nation. However, it came on the heels of a tragedy for the Wolverines, as their longtime coach and leader, Bo Schembechler, succumbed to a heart attack and passed away the day before the game. Michigan coach Lloyd Carr used Schembechler's passing as motivation for the team, as they wanted to honor his memory, thank him for bringing the program back to life, and make him proud. The Buckeyes came out of the game strong and amassed a 28-14 halftime lead, but the Wolverines would challenge them considerably in the second half. Both teams matched each other touchdown for touchdown, and the Wolverines pulled the game to a 42-39 deficit and attempted an onside kick, but the Buckeyes would recover and run out the clock for a dramatic win and a trip to the national championship game. In the ensuing days, there was talk that a rematch of the game could be played for the national championship game, but instead the University of Florida was chosen to play Ohio State and defeated them handily to deny them another national championship. The Buckeyes continued to dominate the series under Tressel until he was forced to resign due to an NCAA scandal in which several players on the team were discovered to have been trading signed memorabilia for tattoos, and Tressel, knowing about the situation, had not reported it to compliance officials. And after one season under an interim coach, the team hired Urban Meyer, the former University of Florida head coach, to replace Tressel, who, like his predecessor, enjoyed a long-standing period of success versus their rival Michigan. Meyer would go on to post a 7-0 record against their bitter rivals during his tenure as coach, with multiple games coming down to the wire amid controversy. During the 2013 contest, the Buckeyes were expected to run away with the win, but with 2 minutes remaining, the Wolverines led a ferocious touchdown drive to pull within a point 42-41. Instead of kicking an extra point to send the game into overtime, Wolverines head coach Brady Hoke instead decided to go for the 2-point conversion to win the game outright, and the attempted pass was intercepted by the Buckeyes to preserve a dramatic 42-41 victory, becoming the first game in the history of the rivalry where both teams scored more than 40 points. The following year, in 2014, the Buckeyes came into the game as number 6 in the nation, whereas Michigan was an uncharacteristic 5-6 record. Nevertheless, the two teams played a close contest until the fourth quarter, when Buckeyes quarterback J.T. Barrett sustained a leg injury and was carted off the field. Surprisingly, the Buckeyes' backup quarterback Cardale Jones came in relief and helped lead the team to another victory over their rivals. And, with a strong performance in the Big Ten championship game, they ended up making a spot in the inaugural college football playoffs as the 4th seed. After a shocking upset victory over the number 1 seed Alabama in the semifinals, the Buckeyes defeated the Oregon Ducks in the championship game to claim the national title, which was their first since 2002. The most recent close game between these rivals occurred in 2016, when the two teams, ranked number 2 and number 3 in the country, faced off in a game that resulted in the first overtime game in the history of the rivalry, when the score was tied 17-17 at the end of regulation. After trading touchdowns in the first overtime, and Michigan kicking a field goal to go up 27-24, the Buckeyes' ensuing drive sputtered to force a 4th down and won. Buckeye quarterback J.T. Barrett kept the ball on a quarterback sneak and was given the first down, but was challenged to see if he actually got the distance. After a lengthy review, the call was confirmed, and the Buckeyes took the next play for the touchdown to win 30-27. After the game, Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh was furious, addressing the media saying, quote, "That was not a first down. I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today," end quote. When Jim Harbaugh was hired as the new coach of Michigan in 2015, it was contemplated that a new 10-year war would soon be brewing between Harbaugh and Meyer, but it ultimately never came to pass, as Harbaugh went a disappointing 0-4 against Meyer's Buckeyes before Meyer announced his retirement as head coach after the 2018 season. The numbers will tell you that Michigan leads the overall series with a record of 58, 50, and 6 record. But you ask fans of either team, and you'll be told, just as they've seen time and time again, that no matter how successful a team has been, no matter what record you come in with, and no matter who's playing, coaching, or running the teams, it'll always be a hard-fought, tooth-and-nail grind of a game that can be won by either team. With passionate fan bases, two of the most iconic stadiums in college football, and a long-standing history of success, both the University of Michigan and the Ohio State University both bring an incredible amount of energy and life to the college football landscape through their yearly rivalry, and college football is better as a result of it. Regardless of what team you root for, every fan is aware of the implications of the game, and the result provides the winner with bragging rights and a sense of pride that the fan bases and players alike say is priceless. This is more than just a game. It's the game. Thank you for listening to the Walking with Legends podcast. We hope that you enjoyed today's content and ask that you continue to share the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, or our other media platforms. Tune in next week as we continue our Rivalries mini-series by discussing the rivalry between the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears. Until next time, have a legendary week.